West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Mr. Ambassador, let's talk about the speech, the historic nature of the speech, and yes, the ad-libbed lines, which actually, as far as PSYOPs goes, was the most important part of the speech. Because I'm wondering, Mr. Ambassador, if it's not nice for once that it is not Vladimir Putin defining the terms of the debate and keeping us guessing, but instead it's Vladimir Putin who's wondering whether he has to sleep with one eye open.
Well, first, Joe, I thought it was a fantastic speech. It was a very important speech. It laid out the difference between democracy and dictatorship, between good and evil. He was clear as day where he stood and where the Western world needed to stand. I hope it will be followed up with more action. That's what Kiev wants. That's what President Zelensky wants. But I think it was a very historic speech and the right speech. And the last part, I would just say a couple of things. First of all, it's not the first time President Biden has said this. I traveled with him in Moscow when he was the vice president. And in March of 2011, he said President Putin, Prime Minister Putin back then, should not run for a third term. He said it back then. This is nothing new. And he spoke out loud when I think hundreds of millions of people around the world, including, by the way, millions of Russians, also think. And third, let's be very clear. People jump from he should not remain in power to saying that he called for regime change. That is not true. He didn't say we should have a regime change. He said this one person should not remain in power. And most certainly he wasn't changing U.S. policy by advocating a policy of regime change. So all in all, I think it was, it wasn't in his speech. He's known to do this. But sometimes saying these things have a purpose, as you just rightly pointed out when Ronald Reagan called the Soviet Union the evil empire back in 1983, and everybody said, oh my goodness, this is shocking what he said. Now we all remember that as a very clear statement of the truth back then.
And it's in a very strong message, Admiral Stavridis, to dissidents in Russia. And you heard after the fall of the Soviet Union, you heard dissidents saying that when Reagan and other Western leaders would say things like that, it sent a strong message. And by the way, as far as Joe Biden saying things like this, you don't have to go back to 2011 or 2012. He said it at the end of his State of the Union address, and it was clearly planned. As he's walking away from the mic, he says, let's go get him. A clear PSYOPs message to Vladimir Putin.
Joe, first and foremost, as you point out, there are different audiences here. You're absolutely right. There's a Russian audience, which, let's face it, is kind of split between those who support Putin, but many, and their numbers are growing, who do not support Putin. So I think that's a strong part of this. Secondly, it's the Europeans who come away from this reassured. I mean, my phone bangs from friends in NATO days as Supreme Allied Commander absolutely lit up at this speech, and it will continue to do so. It was a speech of immense reassurance to our allies. And then finally, Joe, I think it was a good explanatory speech to the American public, one that soared into the rhetoric of why this matters, hope and light, democracy. And I think he laid it out strongly, and he delivered it strongly. And then finally, when I think back on this speech, I'm not going to be thinking about, did he call for a regime change or not? I think Mike McFaul describes that one very well. To me, this speech is called the sacred obligation speech. He talked about our sacred obligation to NATO, and it will also be the don't even think about it speech, kind of the American vernacular. Don't even think about it, Vladimir. I think a strong speech and delivered in a context in Warsaw, a city destroyed in the Second World War and rebuilt. We don't want that again. I think it was a strong speech and sent the right messages.
And David, you wrote some beautiful words about this speech afterwards, about the clear lines that it drew. It's so interesting, though, a lot of the bad faith actors on the Trump right who have been criticizing Joe Biden for being too weak, now criticizing Joe Biden for being too strong, and really revealed themselves after that speech for just how pathetic and how un-American they are in attacking the American president in a time like this. Let's talk about, though, your reaction to it and how you believe that Joe Biden finally did divide the world again against democracy, against the forces of autocracy.
Well, Joe Biden has been speaking since the campaign about a world divided between the forces of democracy and the forces of autocracy. And, of course, what we've seen in Ukraine is a flare-up in that conflict. And I think it was extremely important that he went right up to the edge of the dividing line that now sits across Europe. And he said, we are going to stand up to this. We are going to fight for this. We are going to support Ukraine. We are not going to be cowed. Past administrations have been hesitant to stand up to Putin. He was not hesitant to stand up to Putin. I think the message of the speech from beginning to end was of strength. And I also think that it was a speech that resonated not just in the context of Ukraine, but in the context of a shift. The United States and Europe and our allies are looking at Russia in terms of a long-term threat. They are not going to be satisfied simply to end this war, hopefully to win this war, but they are going to require that Russia stays where it is, that it stops its talk of aggression. And I think finally, as to your first point about the incredible hypocrisy of the Republicans who've taken both sides of this issue, as they had so many others, that this dividing line between autocracy and democracy is not a remote foreign issue. We are fighting that war right here, right now, with people like Donald Trump and others in his party seeking to undermine American democracy and embrace hallmarks of authoritarian governments. So, historical speech, strong, and significant resonance both at home and abroad.
It is Monday, the 28th of March of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is River City Hash Mondays. Oh, what a weekend, huh? Yeah. Well, the war continues apace, as we know. I saw a stat, apparently, on Joe Biden's approval ratings, where less than 30% of those polled want him to end the war in Ukraine, or make that a top priority. Dealing with the economy and inflation is number one. Now, of course, let's be clear, Joe has had historic lows in unemployment, in those job numbers, or highs in the job numbers, lows in the unemployment. Historic numbers in those, in the positive. And apparently every time that happens, his approval rating goes down. How is that? I don't understand. Apparently, folks are upset the way that he's dealing with Ukraine. Okay. They say he's weak, and then they say he's too strong. You're too weak, and then he's too strong. Which one is it? I really want to know. Which one is it? It's both. It doesn't matter what he does. The game is, shall we say, rigged. Oh, my God. After what Kajanti Brown Jackson had to go through, I think that is, I think that's the message, right? That's the shot over the bow. This is how it's going to be. And I should probably remind all of us, this is the way it has been. We are not deemed human enough to be able to, lead, to govern. It doesn't matter that we have educated ourselves. It doesn't matter that we have learned how to, actually run the government. The only thing that matters is that we are in the way of unbridled power. And I don't know, the amassing of large amounts of money. Those go hand in hand, don't they? So I don't want to play that game. That's the way that we're supposed to fix fill the potholes. Is that how we fill the potholes? Jeez. So I'm just curious how it is that Joe can be doing all of these positive things and we get blamed because of the messaging. Well, who's doing the messaging? I mean, please. You can give the media the message, and then the media is going to give that message to the rest of us, and that's somehow our fault. That we have a messaging problem. Yeah, we have a messaging problem. The media is the message. God. The medium is the message. And the message is the medium. So, we got a really big messaging problem. You're right. And how do we get around that? I don't know. Since our whole press structure is predicated upon a profit motive, on the macro level, I mean, we're talking mass amounts of money need to be made. So I guess the CEOs can skim off the majority of it. I don't know. The corporate ownership of our media could be a problem since it looks more and more like the corporate structure of our government, our society, has been behind the insurrection. Just like it was back in the day when fascism and Nazism rose. Just exactly the same. Neither one would have been able to garner the successes that they did. They would not have been able to entrench themselves into power without the big-time moneyed interests backing them. And why would they back them? Because, as I was told repeatedly, and I'm sure you have too, when you're working in a business, it's not a democracy, it's a dictatorship. Can't run a business like a democracy? Well, you can. It can be burdensome, I will say. When I was managing the Bison Brewing Company in Berkeley, we had, 130 investors. And every single one had to say yes so that we could finish put a finish on the bar. Sand it down, and then can we put the finish on now? We got to get a unanimous vote. And there's always someone who says, now we don't want to have the epoxy put on the bar top because we want this to be like a dive bar. Really? And then they'll complain, well, why do we have to replace the bar top? Why did it get all rotted out? Yeah, well, that's how you learn in a democracy. So that's why we have a representative democracy then, right? so that you can consolidate all those voices. And when you got some crackpots who say, well, we don't want to put the epoxy on the bar top, we want it to be a dive bar. Those get a little muted out so that you can fill the potholes and protect the bar top so it doesn't get rotted out and you have to replace the whole thing again. Okay. But, we don't want consensus on that. We don't want a consensus on, how to govern ourselves even. We have to turn it over to the moneyed interests. I guess that's our representation in government. The people who are making us buy stuff. After we've enslaved ourselves to, the wheels of industry. Turning. All right, well, Joe's numbers keep going down no matter how good he does. And it's because apparently the media says the Democratic Party has a messaging problem. I love that. The propagandists are telling us that we have a messaging problem. And I'll just reiterate once again, yes, we do. And I'm looking at the media as the owner of that messaging problem. Okay. For instance, the 9 infamous ad-libbed words. Joe's too strong. He threatened Putin. I don't know. Reagan gets invoked. It was when I heard that, I told my friends and everybody, hey, that's Joe's telling Vlad, read my lips. Okay, so that was Bush. The first one. But still, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. The Soviet Union is the evil empire. Everybody went, USA. First Bush says, read my lips. And I know he summed up with no new taxes. But, it was a Clint Eastwood moment, right? Isn't that what we're supposed to do? Read my lips? Oh, that's just too violent. That's too aggressive. Oh, we're being too aggressive. Oh. Well, you know what? I keep talking about punch the Nazi, and apparently, I guess that might be part of my toxic masculinity. I apologize. I really do. But I might mean it rhetorically. I might. And I will say that a rhetorical punch is not the same as a guided missile into a maternity hospital. It is not a guided missile into the theater in which the survivors of that maternity hospital bombing went, in which they put letters spelling out children on either side of that theater, performing arts center, that you could see from space in a satellite image. And then sending a guided missile there and killing the survivors, moms and their babies, from the previous missile or guided missile bombing of the maternity hospital. Putin is a thug. Putin is a monster. Putin needs to be removed from power. Once again, this is not regime change. We're not talking about getting rid of all the thug government there. All of their mobsters. Jesus. Regime change. You know what regime change was? Is when Putin went in there and destroyed a burgeoning democracy. Put on the trappings of, oh, look, I have a vote. It's like a democracy. It's just like it. You look at the ingredients and you can't pronounce any of the words. They're polysyllabic. You can't pronounce the word in the ingredients. Maybe you don't want to take it. Okay? It's ersatz democracy. Has the trappings of it. I guess to make Putin feel good. Like, I didn't cheat to get this. while he spends his whole time figuring out how to cheat. Why is that familiar? How is that familiar here in America? A party that continuously has to cheat to be able to, I don't know, have a voice at the table. Jesus. All right. Instead of having a rational, reasonable voice in which we can all get together and put our expertise to the fore so that we can fill the potholes, we got a party that has to cheat. I think they have an identity problem. If you're not certain about self, you usually fall to the wayside and do devious things like cheat. And for that, we Democratic Party members, we hippies have to be kicked. Because maybe we might have had a moment of self-realization. And to the other side, that self-realization, empathy for another human being, oh my God. It's a sin, apparently, to them. Empathy for another person. Care for a country that is being overrun by a mobster. So the American public apparently can't tell how Russia invading Ukraine is going to impact our inflation. They don't get it. Especially when you have corporate interests who are arrayed against representative democracy by definition. Pushing a meme. Yep, they are. So, well, I guess I've ranted enough. I apologize, actually, for some of these disjointed rants. It gets tiring after a while. You wake up on the right side of the bed, and you realize, wow, all these conservatives everywhere. Oh, my God, conservatives. That's a nice way of saying, yeah, they're Burgermeisters. Oh, on another subject before we get into the curated part of the show, thank you to those of you out there who extended birthday wishes. Yes, I had a birthday on Saturday and went to my sister's for a little gathering. It was perfectly safe. Spent most of our time outside. It was actually quite nice. And so thank you for that. And, well, we're all getting older. And I guess, by default, we are getting wiser just by the fact that we survived so far. Alrighty. What's on the rest of the menu here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy as we begin on this fabulous River City Hash Mondays? At the top, yeah, even with all the sturm and drang over the infamous 9 ad-libbed words, Biden delivered the right messages in Warsaw. He did. On the rest of the menu, officials lifted most of the evacuation orders that forced more than 20,000 residents to flee a Boulder, Colorado wildfire. Yeah, wildfire. Not even April yet. A rarely cited section of the 14th Amendment dealing with insurrection could disqualify a handful of U.S. House members from seeking reelection. I wonder who they might be. Oh, yeah, the usual suspects. And Iditarod officials punished 3 mushers for sheltering their dogs during a severe freezing windstorm instead of leaving them out to die. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where after Russian threats to attack critical U.S. energy infrastructure, officials are investigating a mysterious explosion and fire at an ExxonMobil refinery in southern Montana. And German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's center-left party secured a big election win in the western state of Saarland that their conservative rivals have led since 1999. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the left of the chat room link, right across the page there near the bottom of that homepage at netrootsradio.com, is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could afford an espresso type coffee drink, and if you could afford to send the funds of that coffee drink to us once a month, it would really help us pay our bills and fly under the radar and continue this powerhouse of resistance against those stated dark forces arrayed against the United States of America and, dare I say, representative democracy around the world. Yeah, they're trying to destroy it all. And we hope to be a bulwark against that, and we have been for 11 years now of continuous 24/7, 365 broadcasting, and we have you to thank for allowing us to fulfill our civic duty in doing so. And so thank you. If you could continue, to those of you who have been so generous over these many years, thank you for continuing to do so. And hopefully to those of you out there, when you feel so inclined, you will be generous to us in the future, because I got to tell you, we need it. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that, and thank you, Tom. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam, and I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Kos about 10 minutes before showtime. Get that posted on Twitter and other social media platforms so you can get to the show notes and links where the real reportage is. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes. Really, wherever podcasts can be found, and of course, the deep archive of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, as well as the whole of the Netroots Radio Library, can be found at the Internet Archive at archive.org. Seems I'm full of excuses today, but excuse me for having the stuffed up vocalizations, because I'm a little stuffed up. Combination of not getting enough sleep, and then I become more susceptible to allergies. And it seems like, according to the underground weather report, that it looks like grass pollen in my area could be the culprit. But I guess it could be anything. I used to be I had developed an allergy to acacias. And I had never had that before. And I'd been working around acacias and in acacias, and at some point I had developed this allergy where my eyes got all swollen and red, and I couldn't see them. They'd be little slits, and I'd be sneezing and post-nasal drip and the whole deal. It was bad. And but then I got over that. About 7 years, after all the cells kind of regenerated and purged themselves out, I was not as susceptible to the syrupy smell of the maples when they would come into bloom. But it could be anything out there. I hate to think it would be pine trees or conifers when they start to push things out that are causing my allergies, because there's a lot of it out here. Yeah. And I also don't want to think that when I'm looking at the beauty of the landscape that I'm miserable and that I assign it to this beauty. I don't want to do that. So I apologize for the stuffed up nose. We'll just say it's an act of God. Be beyond my control. Alrighty. And I just got to say one other thing about this Joe Biden ad-lib 9 words that apparently has caused such a scandal. I still do not understand how somebody like Putin, who invaded another country and has ruthlessly killed its civilians, and we're getting UN and Amnesty International, other NGOs and governments saying that Putin is taking Ukrainian citizens and taking them into Russia and putting them in gulags under the auspices of humanitarian aid. That sounds like the guy is a monster. But apparently Joe Biden calling him a monster and saying he shouldn't be allowed to remain in power is beyond the pale. After this guy has been killing Holocaust survivors living in high-rises, sending guided missiles into these high-rises and killing Holocaust survivors under the auspices of denazifying Ukraine by killing its Jews. And Joe Biden saying, a person like that shouldn't be allowed to remain in power. I still don't understand how that is beyond the pale. It sounds like it's an apology for Vlad. Is everything that the Democratic Party does on any level has to be questioned, has to be denigrated, has to be marginalized, even to the point that we turn over our representative democracy to Vlad? If you think you're going to escape the rock pile for that, it's not going to happen. Everybody gets taken to the rock pile eventually. Everybody. All right, let's get into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy on this fabulous River City Hash Mondays. And it comes out of the Associated Press by anonymous staff there, by the way. A wildfire south of Boulder that forced nearly 20,000 people to flee was listed at over 35% contained by Sunday evening yesterday. And most evacuations had been lifted, officials with Boulder Fire Rescue said. The fire, which ignited on Saturday, burned to within 1,000 yards of homes on the west end of Boulder. No homes were lost, and no injuries were reported. A quick initial attack combined with all of the fuels mitigation treatments that we've done in this area is one of the reasons we've had such great success, Mike Smith, incident commander, said. Fire crews were also able to use aircraft to fight the fire, laying down lines of fire retardant near homes in the rolling hills south of the college town. The evacuation order was reduced late Saturday to cover about 1,700 people and 700 residences, down from about 8,000 homes earlier in the day. Fire managers hope to allow more people back into their homes as the area becomes safe, officials said. New information for those still evacuated was expected later today, Monday. Gary D. Robertson of the Associated Press brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. I should note, as I did last week, that I have been steering somewhat clear of Reuters recently because they still have an association with TASS, the Russia state media outlet. So I feel somewhat hesitant to source Reuters for any articles until that association is, well, shall we say, cleared up. Yes. Okay, back to this article from the AP. An 1868 amendment to the U.S. Constitution, best known for protecting the due process rights of previously enslaved Americans, has resurfaced in certain congressional races this year. Some attorneys and voters believe, okay, we'll continue here, believe a rarely cited section of the 14th Amendment dealing with insurrection can disqualify a handful of U.S. House members from seeking reelection for events surrounding the January 6, 2021 riot at the Capitol. It wasn't a riot. It was an insurrection. Okay, let's be clear. And the reason that this section is rarely cited is that we can count on one hand how many insurrections have taken place in these United States of America. First-term Republican firebrands Madison Cawthorn and Marjorie Taylor Greene are among those targeted. Both are strong supporters of Trump, who have pushed his unsubstantiated claims of voter fraud in the 2020 presidential election. It's a largely untested argument working its way through election agencies in at least 3 states with little success so far. But you know what is a success? Getting rid of ballot boxes because there are pedophiles hiding in it to steal your kids as soon as you put a ballot inside. Yeah, crazy stuff. Q says something and states can't run fast enough to change our whole electoral system. And yet, when you want to use the Constitution to actually get rid of some insurgents who should not be allowed to hold office? All right. We'll continue with what the 14th Amendment says. Well, there are 5 sections to the amendment. The best known declares that no state can deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Well, I guess we just got rid of a bunch of women in Texas who don't really, this doesn't apply to them. Well, back to the matter at hand. Section 3 of the amendment also declares that no one can serve in Congress who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same. This section was designed to keep representatives who had fought for the Confederacy during the Civil War from returning to Congress. Well, they're doing it now. Why can't it apply? The amendment, however, allows Congress to pass laws that can remove such restrictions. Now, voters from congressional districts where Cawthorn and Greene are seeking re-election this fall allege in legal filings that evidence shows they helped facilitate the January 6, 2021 insurrection that attempted to thwart the certification of President Joe Biden's Electoral College victory. In other words, the peaceful transition of power. The voters want state officials to investigate Greene and Cawthorn and disqualify them from appearing on ballots this year based on the amendment's language. That the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A fierce winter storm in the last stretch of this year's Iditarod Trail sled dog race, which ultimately forced 6 mushers to scratch the same day, now has cost 3 other mushers for sheltering their dogs instead of leaving them outside in the harsh conditions. Millie Porsild of Denmark, Michelle Phillips of Canada, and Riley Deich of Fairbanks were penalized for taking dogs inside shelter cabins to ride out the storm with winds so strong they whipped up whiteout conditions. The decision to punish the mushers was made by Race Marshal Mark Nordman, who said the indoor rest for the dogs amounted to a competitive advantage over teams that trailed them into Nome. No doubt that Michelle and Millie did the right thing for their dogs, Nordman said, but it also affected the competition for racers going forward. Porsild was dropped from 14th to 17th position, while Phillips dropped 1 notch to 18th. Deich was not demoted in the standings, but he was fined $1,000 after officials determined there were no other mushers close to him that would have been affected by the dogs resting inside. The drop in finishing position equated to about $3,400 less for Porsild and $1,000 less for Phillips. The nearly 1,000-mile race across Alaska was won on March 15th by Brent Sass, who was also affected by the storm just as he was nearing the finish line in Nome. He said he fell off the sled and couldn't see anything and thought he was going to have to hunker down with his dogs and ride out the storm. The demotion of the 3 mushers, which was not widely publicized by the Iditarod, immediately drew a harsh retort from the race's biggest critic, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals. Nothing makes it clearer that this death race must end than the fact that the Iditarod slapped mushers with a fine as punishment for acting to prevent dogs' deaths, PETA Executive Vice President Tracy Ryman said in a statement. She called for cruelty charges to be filed against mushers who did leave their dogs outside while they went inside shelter cabins. Cruelty is baked into this deadly race, and it's time for it to stop. Pulser defended her decision to bring the dogs inside. Stopping and having the dogs in the shelter cabin gave Michelle and I no competition edge. On the contrary, we both lost the edge we had, especially me and my team, she wrote in the Daily News from Denmark. Now, Iditarod rules say dogs cannot be taken inside shelters except for race veterinary's medical examination or treatment. However, the entry immediately after that one in the Iditarod rulebook says, there will be no cruel or inhumane treatment of dogs. Cruel or inhumane treatment involves any action or inaction which causes preventable pain or suffering to a dog. There was no doubt to me that my dog, sitting unprotected in these conditions, could lead to death or deaths of dogs, Pulsard wrote in an email to Nordman after the race, explaining why she did it. With no natural windbreaks or materials available to shelter them, I made what I felt was the best choice for my dog's welfare in that extreme situation. Phillips, the other musher, fined woman musher, said that was her last Iditarod. All right, let's get to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Karen Hopkin. It's probably happened to you. You look at a parking meter or a pickle slice or the foam in your cup of cappuccino, and you think, hey, that looks like a face. It's a phenomenon called pareidolia, and it's something we humans tend to do. Now, a new study suggests we also do something else. We tend to see those illusory faces as having a gender, and most often, we think they're male. The findings appear in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences.
Growing up, my sister Jenny and I had our own word for examples of face pareidolia, bees-ups.
Susan Wardle, a cognitive neuroscientist at the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda. Her term is total nonsense, but Wardle must have felt some connection with bees-ups. As a grown-up, she set out to study them after a conversation she had with her colleague Jessica Taubert.
We were talking about face neurons in the brain, which respond preferentially to images of faces, but they also sometimes respond to pictures of round objects, such as apples or clocks. That reminded us of the experience of seeing faces in objects, and we thought it would be fun to find out whether the face regions of the brain respond to illusory faces in a similar way to real faces.
Indeed, in an earlier study, they found that the same brain regions activated by actual human faces were also triggered by faux faces in inanimate objects, like potatoes or teapots or washing machines. But that made them wonder, what do we see in these illusory faces?
For example, do these faces appear to be of a particular age or gender, and do they have a specific emotional expression?
So they set out to collect a cornucopia of images.
We started by finding examples of face pareidolia on the internet, but now people send us their own examples, and we also take photos of illusory faces that we see out in the world.
They showed 250 of these photos to some 3,800 volunteers.
And we found that people readily attribute these features to illusory faces. For example, a given illusory face might look like a fearful young boy or a grumpy older woman.
But most striking of all,
there is a strong bias for people to perceive illusory faces as male rather than female.
About 4 times as often, the researchers found.
And this was the case for both female and male participants.
So it wasn't just that men saw Mr. Potato Head everywhere they looked. It also wasn't tied to the type of object in question, like a hammer versus a handbag.
And the male bias persists when the faces are shown in black and white, so it's not due to gender associations with color either.
Obviously, none of these fake faces has a biological sex.
Which means there is no reason for us to perceive them to have a particular gender. The fact that we do shows that the illusory faces also engage our social perception system.
And the reason we default to seeing males is that our brains need more information before we see a face as female. Think of a smiley face emoji.
Most people would probably say that it looks more male than female. The addition of other details such as eyelashes and hair is used to make emojis look more female. The same is true of Lego characters.
The fact that we're so quick to see faces in couch cushions and tree trunks and slices of bread, gender assignments aside, is maybe not all that surprising. The same thing happens to monkeys, creatures who are also hardwired for making social connections.
And it suggests that we see illusory faces because, like other social primates, our brains are so tuned into faces. We don't want to miss a single face in the environment, even if that means occasionally making a mistake.
Seems the potential benefit of gaining a friend is worth more than the potential cost of losing face. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Karen Hopkin.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Welcome to 60-Second Civics. Today we're joined by a very special guest.
I'm May D'Agostino, and I am a judge in the Northern District of New York.
Thank you for joining us today, Judge D'Agostino. As a U.S. District Court judge, you have achieved one of the highest positions of the legal profession. Can you share with us how you got where you are today?
Well, I would say that I really never anticipated being a judge, but after many years as a trial attorney, when the opportunity arose for public service, I was very happy to answer the call.
What is it like being the first woman sitting as a judge in many of the courthouses you've presided over?
Being the first woman in the Albany courthouse, I'm reminded every day of all of the women who came before me in terms of being outstanding lawyers and paving the way for someone like me.
Thank you very much, Judge May D'Agostino. Join us again tomorrow when Judge D'Agostino addresses the issue of barriers to women entering the legal profession. This has been 60 Second Civics, a podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1968. This is the day in Memphis, Tennessee, that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s final march for civil rights. If you're a regular listener to Labor History in 2, last month you heard about how AFSCME sanitation workers in Memphis went on strike to win union recognition. They were protesting low wages and poor working conditions, but city officials refused to negotiate. Dr. King came to Memphis to support the effort. On March 18th, he gave a stirring speech to a packed church, calling for a ramp-up in community support of the strike. A march to City Hall was planned to bring more attention to the plight of the striking workers. Memphis city officials estimated that 22,000 students skipped school to take part in the march. Although organizers called for nonviolence, some of the young participants were fed up with the slow pace of civil rights in Memphis. Picket marchers at the end of the line began to use their signs to break store windows. The police crackdown was swift. A line of police in riot gear stretched across the street to meet the marchers. Fearing greater violence, King called off the demonstration and was quickly taken to a nearby hotel. Chaos erupted. Some stores were looted. Police met the crowd with tear gas, nightsticks, and gunfire. Gunfire that killed a 16-year-old boy. Police chased fleeing demonstrators back to a church and released tear gas inside the sanctuary. They clubbed people as they lay on the floor trying to get fresh air. Undeterred by the violence, Dr. King returned to Memphis the following week. It was there that he was murdered by an assassin's bullet, giving his life in the struggle for black sanitation workers to have dignity on the job and the right to bargain for a better life.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, and follow us on the Twitters at Labor History in 2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. We always begin, whether from around the world, along the banks of the Rogue River and the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 51 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting only a high of about 62. We had mid-upper 70s over the weekend, so cloudy conditions throughout the day with a few showers this afternoon. Winds will be out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour, and we're hoping to get at least 1/10 of an inch of rain. And then cloudy overnight with lows in the mid-40s, winds out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10. Sunshine and clouds mixed tomorrow with highs near 70, winds out of the west-northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Confirmed cases of coronavirus have not been updated from the weekend. We now stand at 424,087 confirmed cases, and the deceased stands at 503 confirmed. Grass pollen is rated low outside the window here in Rogue River proper. The air quality index for the region is good at 32 parts per million, and that daytime UV index has dropped very low. Well, actually, it was in the upper moderate range, but now it's in the low range at level 2. Barometric pressure is rising at 29.75 inches. Visibility is up to 9 miles, and relative humidity is at 84%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 60 degrees and partly cloudy. Paris is 71 and sunny. Rome is 68 and fair. Kyiv is 55 degrees, sunny with heavy wind conditions. Kabul is 60 degrees and clear. Hong Kong is 63 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 53 and mostly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 70 degrees with rain. San Francisco, California is 50 degrees with showers in the vicinity. And New York is a chilly 28 degrees Fahrenheit and partly cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. Staff at the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The cause of an explosion and fire at an ExxonMobil refinery in southern Montana is under investigation, company officials said yesterday, Sunday. The fire began about 10 p.m. Saturday night at a refinery in Lockwood, a suburb of Billings. It was extinguished at about 1:15 a.m. Sunday morning. There were no injuries, and all employees and contractors were accounted for. It isn't clear how much damage was done, and ExxonMobil officials did not respond to questions about how the fire might affect production. A full assessment of any damages and an investigation of the cause will be taking place, officials said. The plant can refine up to 2.5 million gallons of crude oil per day and produces about 600 million gallons of gasoline and diesel fuel each year. Other products include asphalt, butane, and propane. The refinery's emergency response team fought the fire along with crews from Lockwood, Billings, and other area refineries, Yellowstone County officials said.
Je te donne c'est mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Gear Molson of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's center-left Social Democrats secured a big win in a western state that their conservative rivals have led since 1999 in the first test at the ballot box since Scholz's national government took office in December. The result means that Social Democrat Anke Rellinger will become the new governor of Saarland, a region on the French border that is one of Germany's smallest states with nearly 1 million people. It is not clear that Rellinger's success had much to do with an eventful first 100 days for Scholz's three-party national coalition, during which Russia's war in Ukraine prompted the chancellor to upend German defense policy and Germany to welcome large numbers of refugees. The country also is grappling with a persistent wave of coronavirus infections recently seeing over 200,000 new cases in many days. At the same time, it was the first of 3 state elections within 2 months, all in regions led by governors from the center-right Christian Democratic Union Party of former Chancellor Angela Merkel, that will help set the political tone for the coming year. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up tomorrow for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.